Chapter 1. The Driveway Warning. Nolan slowed the truck as the familiar street came into view, the tires humming softly against the asphalt. Late afternoon sunlight washed across the neighborhood in warm gold, casting long shadows over lawns he once knew better than his own hands. The houses hadn't changed much. The maple trees still lined the sidewalks, their branches bare but dignified in the cool air. A woman jogged past with earbuds in, barely glancing at him. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked once and fell silent. Everything looked the same, and yet nothing felt the same. His grip tightened on the steering wheel as the old house came into sight at the end of the block. White siding, dark shutters. The wide porch he'd rebuilt himself after a storm nearly tore it off years ago. The driveway curved gently toward the garage, his garage, now shining under new floodlights he didn't recognize. For a moment, Nolan forgot to breathe. "Dad!" Tyler's voice pulled him back. Nolan glanced sideways at his son. Tyler sat stiffly in the passenger seat, backpack at his feet, even though they weren't staying long. 11 years old, but today he looked older somehow, watchful, tense. "You okay?" Nolan asked. Tyler nodded quickly, too quickly. They rolled forward slowly, the truck creeping toward the driveway. Music drifted faintly from the house, laughter, clinking glasses, the muffled sound of people enjoying a dinner party. Laurel's dinner party. Nolan swallowed. He hadn't been back here since the divorce papers were finalized, since Reed had started parking his expensive car where Nolan used to leave his tools. He pulled into the driveway, automatically, muscle memory guiding him as if the last few years had never happened. And then Tyler grabbed his sleeve. Hard. "Dad, don't park here." Nolan blinked, startled by the urgency in his son's voice. Tyler rarely sounded like that, sharp, almost frightened. "What?" "We need to park on the street," Tyler said quickly, eyes fixed ahead. "Please." Nolan slowed to a stop halfway up the driveway. The garage door loomed in front of them, closed, its surface newly painted a darker shade than before. Floodlights mounted above it reflected faintly against the truck's hood. Nolan said gently, "What's wrong?" Tyler shook his head, jaw tight. "Just please, don't park here." Nolan studied him. This wasn't childish stubbornness. Tyler's shoulders were rigid, fingers curled into the fabric of Nolan's jacket. His breathing was shallow. Fear. Real fear. Nolan didn't ask another question. He shifted into reverse and backed slowly down the driveway. Tyler exhaled quietly, the tension leaving him in a rush. They pulled to the curb instead, parking beneath a streetlight. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Nolan turned off the engine, but kept his hands on the wheel, eyes scanning the property with new awareness. Parking on the street changed everything. From this angle, he could see more than just the front of the house. Cars lined the curb, unfamiliar ones. A black SUV with tinted windows. A sleek gray sedan he didn't recognize. Another vehicle idled farther down the street, its engine running though no one appeared inside. Nolan's instincts stirred. Years in special forces had trained him to notice patterns, to read environments before stepping into them. And suddenly, details began to stand out. The cameras. Small, discrete domes mounted along the roofline. Not the basic home security cameras he'd installed years ago, but newer models with wider lenses. One angled toward the driveway. Another pointed toward the street, tracking passing movement. He frowned. Laurel had never cared much about security systems. "Tyler," he said quietly, "why didn't you want me to park near the garage?" Tyler hesitated. "I just don't like it," he muttered. "That's not an answer." Tyler stared at his hands. "Sometimes people go in there," he said softly. "Late." Nolan felt something cold settle in his chest. "Guests." Tyler shook his head. "They don't come through the house." Nolan followed Tyler's gaze to the garage. Floodlights hummed faintly, brighter than necessary for early evening. The door remained closed, no windows revealing anything inside. "You've seen this yourself?" Nolan asked. Tyler nodded. "How many times?" "I don't know," he whispered. "A lot." Nolan leaned back slightly, processing. A small voice in his head began assembling pieces he didn't yet understand. The unfamiliar vehicles. The upgraded security. Tyler's fear. Across the street, A man stood beside the black SUV, pretending to check his phone. He glanced up briefly toward the house, or toward Nolan, then looked away too quickly. Nolan watched him without turning his head. "Stay here," Nolan said quietly. "I'm coming with you," Tyler replied instantly. Nolan almost smiled despite the tension. "We're just going to the front door." Tyler nodded, but stayed close as they stepped out of the truck. Cold air brushed against Nolan's face, carrying the scent of cut grass and faint perfume drifting from the house. The laughter inside sounded forced somehow, louder than necessary, as if trying too hard to feel normal. As they walked toward the house, Nolan's eyes tracked everything. The landscaping had changed, new stone edging along the path. A motion sensor light flickered briefly, activating as they approached. Another camera turned slightly, following their movement. He stopped. That camera had just moved. "Dad," Tyler whispered. "Nothing," Nolan murmured, though it wasn't nothing. At the edge of the driveway, Nolan paused again, glancing toward the garage. He listened. For a brief moment, he thought he heard something, a faint metallic sound, like equipment shifting or a heavy object being dragged. Then silence. He felt Tyler press closer to him. "You hear that?" Tyler asked quietly. Nolan didn't answer. Instead, he forced a calm expression onto his face and continued toward the front steps. The porch light glowed warmly, welcoming, almost mocking. From here, the house looked exactly like the home he'd built, the home he'd lost. The front door opened suddenly. Laurel stood there, smiling too brightly. "Nolan," she said, voice sweet and practiced. "You made it." Her eyes flicked briefly toward the street, then toward the garage, then back to him. Just for a second, her smile faltered. Nolan noticed. He noticed everything. And as he stepped onto the porch, a realization settled deep in his gut. This wasn't just an awkward social visit. It might be dangerous. Chapter 2, Ghosts of the Past. The warmth inside the house hit Nolan like a memory he hadn't asked for. Soft yellow light spilled across polished wood floors. Laughter echoed from the living room, blending with the clink of glasses and low music playing somewhere out of sight. The scent of roasted meat and expensive perfume hung in the air, familiar, but altered, like someone had tried to recreate something real using only surface details. Laurel stepped aside to let them in. "You're late," she said lightly, though her eyes searched his face as if measuring something deeper. "Traffic," Nolan replied. It wasn't true. He'd arrived early and waited down the block, watching the house, studying who came and went. Tyler slipped past Laurel without a word, moving toward the staircase instinctively. Nolan noticed how his son avoided looking toward the hallway leading to the garage entrance. Laurel noticed too. "He can leave his shoes there," she said, gesturing toward the rack by the wall. The same rack Nolan had built years ago, sanding the edges smooth so Tyler wouldn't catch his fingers on splinters. Nolan crouched to untie his boots, buying himself a moment to breathe. Every detail felt sharper than it should, the creak of the floorboards, the faint hum of electronics somewhere deeper in the house. "You changed the lighting," he said casually. Laurel smiled. Reed thought it felt more modern. The name landed between them like a dropped glass. Nolan stood slowly. "Well," Laurel said, smoothing her dress, "everyone's excited to meet you." He doubted that. As they stepped into the living room, conversations paused briefly. Heads turned. Faces registered recognition, some curious, some cautious. Nolan cataloged them automatically. A man in a navy suit with a tight smile, investor, maybe legal background. A younger couple who looked out of place, their posture stiff, eyes scanning the room rather than engaging. Two older men near the fireplace speaking in hushed tones. And Reed, standing near the bar, laughing too loudly at something someone had said. He looked almost the same confident posture, same easy charm, but Nolan noticed subtle differences. A tension in his shoulders, eyes that moved too often, checking exits, checking people. Reed spotted him. "Nolan," he called, spreading his arms as if greeting an old friend. "You actually came." Nolan walked forward slowly. "Invitation said I should," he replied. They shook hands. Reed's grip tightened just a little too long. How have you been? Reed asked. Busy. Still working construction? Still breathing, Nolan said evenly. Reed laughed, but the sound didn't reach his eyes. Tyler hovered near the wall, watching silently. A woman approached Nolan with a glass of wine. You must be Laurel's ex-husband, she said cheerfully. I've heard so much about you. Nolan took the glass politely, but didn't drink. All good, I hope. She smiled vaguely and drifted away. Nolan moved through the room slowly, letting conversations flow around him while his attention stayed sharp. This house used to feel open, lived in. Now it felt staged, like a set built to impress. He paused near the dining table, fingers brushing the edge lightly. He remembered sanding that surface, staining it by hand. Laurel had insisted on the darker finish. They'd argued over it for an hour and ended up laughing on the kitchen floor afterward. A flash of memory tightened his chest. He forced himself back to the present. Laurel joined him again. You're quiet, she said. I'm observing. Her smile faltered. You always did that, and you always hated it. She didn't deny it. Music shifted to a softer tune. Guests moved casually between rooms. Conversations about business deals floated through the air, logistics, supply chains, market opportunities. Nolan listened carefully. Some of these people didn't belong at a casual dinner party. He noticed briefcases tucked discreetly near chairs. A man checking messages repeatedly, shielding his phone screen. Another guest who never strayed far from the hallway, leading toward the back of the house. Toward the garage. Nolan's pulse slowed, steady and controlled. This confirmed it. He wasn't here by accident. For weeks, he had been digging quietly into Reed's activities, unusual shipments, financial movements that didn't match legitimate contracts, old contacts who had grown reluctant to speak but hinted at something bigger. And tonight was a piece of that puzzle. Tyler appeared beside him suddenly. They closed the door, Tyler whispered. What door? The one near the kitchen. They never let anyone go there. Nolan nodded slightly, keeping his expression neutral. Stay close, he murmured. Reed approached again, handing drinks to guests with practiced ease. Everyone, he announced casually. This place used to belong to Nolan. He practically built half of it himself. Polite laughter followed. Nolan felt eyes on him. Good bones, he said simply. Reed grinned. We made a few upgrades. I noticed. Their eyes locked briefly. Laurel interrupted. Dinner will be ready soon. People began drifting toward the dining area. Nolan stepped aside and slipped his phone from his pocket, angling his body away from the crowd. His thumb moved quickly across the screen, typing a short message. Inside, multiple unknown guests. Security heavier than expected. 3 dots appeared almost immediately. Copy. Stay observant. Meredith. He deleted the conversation instantly, sliding the phone back into his pocket. Meredith's involvement remained invisible to everyone here, including Laurel. Officially, she was just Tyler's music teacher. Unofficially, she had access to networks Nolan couldn't reach alone. Their partnership had started cautiously, built on mutual recognition, 2 people trained to see beyond surfaces. Nolan looked up. Reed stood at the end of the room, speaking quietly with one of the suited men. The conversation stopped abruptly when Reed noticed Nolan watching. Tyler tugged at his sleeve again. Dad, he whispered, something's wrong here. Nolan rested a steady hand on his son's shoulder. I know. The house felt different now that he stood inside it again, heavier, like the walls held secrets they couldn't quite contain. He remembered losing it all, the divorce papers, the legal battles, the slow unraveling of trust when Laurel's affair with Reed came into the open. Losing the company's stake had hurt less than losing the home. Less than watching Tyler pack his toys into boxes while pretending it was an adventure. Tonight wasn't about nostalgia. It was about answers. And Tyler's fear confirmed what Nolan already suspected. This house was hiding something. Chapter 3, The First Suspicion. Nolan stood near the edge of the dining room, holding a glass he hadn't touched, watching the house as if it were a living thing revealing its secrets piece by piece. Dinner preparations filled the air with activity, plates clinking, soft laughter, footsteps moving between kitchen and living room. But beneath the ordinary noise, something else hummed quietly, just out of place enough to trigger his instincts. He noticed the first sign when a man in a fitted black jacket stepped between two guests and gently redirected them away from the hallway near the kitchen. Restrooms down the other side. The man said politely, though his tone carried an unmistakable firmness. Nolan's eyes followed him. The man didn't look like hired waitstaff. His posture was too rigid, movements too deliberate. He scanned faces instead of serving food. Security, but not the casual kind. Nolan moved closer, pretending to admire a framed photograph on the wall, a photo he remembered taking years ago during a camping trip with Laurel and Tyler. The memory felt like it belonged to someone else. He angled himself just enough to watch the hallway. A small keypad had been installed beside a closed door, sleek, metallic, clearly new. Nolan frowned. That hadn't been there before. Another guest approached the hallway casually, wine glass in hand. "Kitchen this way?" the man asked. Other side, the black-jacketed man replied immediately, stepping subtly into his path. The guest nodded and turned away without questioning. Nolan's pulse slowed into a familiar rhythm, the calm focus he used during operations. He began mapping the room in his mind. Exits, lines of sight, people who didn't fit. Tyler appeared beside him again, quiet as a shadow. "They don't like people going there," Tyler murmured. Nolan nodded slightly. "You've noticed before?" Tyler hesitated. "Yeah." Nolan crouched slightly, so they were at eye level. "Tell me everything." Tyler glanced around, making sure no one listened. "At night, trucks come sometimes," he said softly. "Not big ones. Vans. They don't use the front door." "The garage?" Nolan asked. Tyler nodded quickly. "How many people?" "I don't know. 2 or 3 usually. Sometimes more." Tyler swallowed. "They don't stay long." Nolan felt the pieces shifting inside his head. "What time?" "Late," Tyler whispered. "After I'm supposed to be asleep." Nolan studied his son carefully. Tyler wasn't exaggerating. His voice carried the quiet certainty of someone who had watched too closely for too long. "Have you told anyone else?" Nolan asked. Tyler shook his head. "Good," Nolan said gently, though the word felt heavier than it should. He straightened slowly, scanning the room again. Near the far wall, another man stood with his arms crossed, eyes moving constantly. Not drinking, not engaging in conversation, just watching. Guard number 2. Nolan moved toward the kitchen, weaving through guests. Laurel stood near the counter, directing a catering assistant with forced enthusiasm. "Can you bring the salads out now?" she said. "Yes, thank you." She turned and froze briefly when she saw Nolan approaching. "Enjoying yourself?" she asked, voice light. "Observing," he replied. Her smile tightened. "You always did that." "You always noticed," he said. For a moment, they stood in silence, the years between them pressing closer. "This place feels different," Nolan said casually. "Well, people change," Laurel replied quickly. "Homes evolve. Security evolves too." Her eyes flicked toward the hallway before she caught herself. "We've had incidents," she said. "What kind of incidents?" "Nothing serious," she said quickly. "Just being cautious." Nolan watched her carefully. Laurel had never been good at lying outright. She preferred half-truths, distractions. "Reed's idea?" he asked. She nodded too quickly. "Yes, business reasons." "What kind of business requires guards in the hallway?" Her expression hardened slightly. "You don't live here anymore, Nolan." The words landed cold between them. He held her gaze calmly. "I'm just asking." "Well," she said, smoothing her hair nervously. "Try not to interrogate my guests, okay?" Nolan almost smiled. "I haven't started yet." She turned away before he could respond further, picking up a tray with unnecessary focus. Her shoulders were tense. Afraid. Not angry, afraid. That difference mattered. Nolan stepped aside as servers began carrying dishes toward the dining room. One of the black-jacketed men followed close behind, eyes scanning constantly. Definitely security. Tyler reappeared, tugging lightly at Nolan's sleeve. "Dad," he whispered, "come here." They moved toward a quieter corner near the staircase. "I heard them talking before," Tyler said. "Who?" "The guys who go into the garage." Nolan kept his face neutral. "What did they say?" "I don't know everything," Tyler admitted, "but they said something about shipments. In batches." Nolan felt a chill move through him. Batches? Tyler nodded. And once, someone was mad because something got delayed. Nolan glanced toward the hallway again. Shipments. Restricted access. Security upgrades. Late-night deliveries. He didn't jump to conclusions. Years of training had taught him that assumptions could kill, but the pattern forming in his mind pointed toward something organized and illegal. Ty, he said softly, if anything ever feels wrong here, you tell me immediately. Okay. Tyler nodded. Nolan rested a hand on his son's shoulder, grounding himself. Across the room, Reed laughed loudly again, drawing attention away from himself in a way that now felt intentional, controlled chaos masking something beneath. Laurel moved through the guests, smiling too brightly, adjusting details that didn't need adjusting. Nolan watched her closely. For a brief moment, she paused near the hallway and glanced toward the garage door, a flicker of tension crossing her face before she forced her smile back into place. She was hiding something, and whatever it was, it had turned this house into something Nolan barely recognized. Chapter 4, Meredith's Role. The noise inside the house began to feel suffocating. Laughter echoed too loudly, glasses clinked too sharply, and conversations felt rehearsed rather than natural. Nolan stood near the edge of the dining room, watching the subtle choreography of movement, the way certain guests never strayed far from the back hallway, the way one of the security men kept repositioning himself for better sight lines. He checked his watch casually. 7 minutes. That was how long it had been since Meredith texted him. Outside, side yard. Nolan placed his untouched drink on a table and turned toward Tyler, who was quietly eating a piece of bread near the wall. I'm stepping out for some air, Nolan said casually. Stay where I can see you. Tyler nodded, eyes flicking briefly toward the garage hallway before returning to his plate. Nolan moved through the crowd slowly, greeting a few guests with polite nods. He stepped onto the back patio, letting the cool evening air wrap around him like a reset. The yard looked different. New landscaping lights illuminated pathways he didn't recognize. The old swing set was gone, replaced with sleek outdoor furniture arranged like a showroom display. He walked farther along the side of the house, away from the windows. Meredith stood near the fence, half shadowed by a tree. She wore a simple dark jacket and jeans, her posture relaxed but alert, the way someone stood when they were aware of every angle around them. To anyone else, she might look like a friend dropping by late. To Nolan, she looked exactly like what she was. Prepared. You're late, she said quietly as he approached. I had to make it look natural, Nolan replied. She smiled faintly. You've never been good at looking natural. He stopped beside her, scanning the yard briefly before speaking again. Security's tighter than expected, he said. I noticed, she replied. 2 watchers near the street. 1 more near the back gate. Nolan raised an eyebrow. You counted fast. I counted before you even parked, she said. For a moment, they stood in silence, listening to the muffled sound of conversation drifting through the house. To anyone watching through the window, they looked like 2 acquaintances sharing a quiet conversation. Only their eyes revealed otherwise. Tell me what you've seen, Meredith said. Nolan exhaled slowly. Restricted access to the garage, he began. Keypad entry. At least 2 men acting like security. Guests who don't look like guests. She nodded, unsurprised. And Tyler confirmed late-night deliveries, he added quietly. Vans. No house access. Straight to the garage. Meredith's expression hardened slightly. That matches what I found, she said. She pulled a phone from her pocket, angling the screen so only he could see. Numbers, charts, and highlighted transactions filled the display. Reed's accounts, she explained, or at least the ones we can trace. Nolan leaned closer. Financial irregularities, she said. Large transfers moving through shell companies. Funds entering from overseas distributors, then disappearing through multiple layers. Money laundering, Nolan said quietly. Most likely. She swiped to another screen. These shipments started about 8 months ago. Chemical purchases routed through several suppliers. Guess whose old company name appears on the paperwork? Nolan's jaw tightened. My construction import license. She nodded. They're using it as cover. Probably betting you wouldn't notice. They underestimated how much I pay attention, he muttered. Meredith glanced toward the house, ensuring no one approached. There's more, she said softly. She opened another file, medical reports, headlines, data summaries. Overdose spikes, she said. Regional clusters. Synthetic opioids. New formulations hitting the street. Nolan felt the air grow heavier. You're saying Reed's connected? I'm saying the timeline matches, she replied carefully. The chemicals he's importing are consistent with precursor materials. Nolan's gaze drifted toward the garage side of the house, invisible from where they stood, but impossible to ignore. And if he's producing locally, he said slowly, it explains the security. And the restricted access, Meredith added. Silence settled between them. The weight of it felt different now, no longer just personal betrayal or suspicion, but something darker, broader. This isn't just about us anymore, Nolan said quietly. No, she agreed. If we're right, people are dying. The words hung between them. Nolan felt a flicker of anger beneath the calm surface he maintained, anger at Reed, at Laurel, at himself for not seeing it sooner. You said you had more? He asked. Meredith nodded. I pulled partial medical data through a contact, she said. Unusual overdose, cases flagged as potential new compounds. High potency, hard to trace. Nolan clenched his jaw. And you think it's coming from here? I think there's a strong possibility, she said carefully. But we need proof. Nolan nodded slowly. We don't move without confirmation. Exactly. She slipped her phone back into her pocket. You're still inside the circle, she added. You have access tonight that we might not get again. Nolan understood. Rushing in without solid evidence would destroy any chance of stopping this properly. We observe, he said. We confirm, she replied. Then we act. A faint smile touched her lips. Still thinking like a soldier. Still alive because of it, he said. Inside the house, laughter rose again, louder this time. Someone turned up the music. Meredith glanced toward the lit windows. You should go back, she said. Too long outside and someone will notice. Nolan nodded but hesitated. Tyler's scared, he said quietly. Meredith's expression softened slightly. Kids notice things adults try to ignore, she said. Trust that. He did. That was why he was here. Not just for answers, but for protection. Nolan turned toward the patio, pausing briefly before stepping back into the light spilling from the house. We confirm everything first, he said over his shoulder. Meredith nodded once. No moves until we know exactly what we're dealing with. They both understood what that meant. Before taking action, they needed certainty. Chapter 5, The Hidden Tunnel. Nolan re-entered the house with a calm expression, but his thoughts moved faster than his steps. Dinner had begun. Guests gathered around the long table, his old table, plates filled, glasses raised, conversation flowing with practiced ease. Reed stood at the head, telling a story that made everyone laugh a little too loudly. Laurel sat nearby, smiling in all the right places but glancing often toward the back hallway. Nolan slipped into a chair beside Tyler. You okay? He asked quietly. Tyler nodded, but leaned closer. Are you leaving? Not yet, Nolan said. Tyler studied his face. Something's going to happen, isn't it? Nolan paused. Maybe, he said gently, but I need you to stay calm. Tyler nodded slowly, trusting him without question. Nolan scanned the room again. 2 security men remained near the hallway, leading toward the garage. One more had positioned himself near the kitchen entrance. Access control. Intentional. He ate a few bites without tasting anything, his mind working through angles and timing. Then a memory surfaced, unexpected but sharp. The renovation. Years ago, when a house needed foundation repairs, Nolan had designed a maintenance crawl space beneath part of the property to access plumbing and wiring without tearing open walls. He had extended it farther than necessary, anticipating future upgrades, including a narrow passage that ran beneath the garage. He hadn't told many people about it. Laurel barely remembered it. His pulse quickened. He glanced at his watch. Meredith needed to know. Nolan excused himself quietly after dinner began winding down, slipping toward the hallway opposite the garage access. One of the guards watched him. Restroom? Nolan asked casually. The man nodded once. Nolan walked past without hesitation. Instead of entering the restroom, he turned sharply toward the laundry room, a small space near the back of the house rarely used during gatherings. He closed the door behind him. A quick message appeared on his phone. Side yard. Now. Meredith responded immediately. On my way. Nolan opened the back door quietly and stepped outside, moving quickly along the shadowed edge of the house. Meredith appeared moments later from behind the fence. You found something, she said. I remembered something, he replied. He led her toward a cluster of shrubs near the corner of the yard. Kneeling, he brushed aside leaves and dirt until a small metal panel emerged, flush with the ground, nearly invisible unless you knew where to look. You built this? She asked. Maintenance access, he said. Runs beneath the garage. She smiled faintly. You're full of surprises. Nolan lifted the panel slowly. Hinges creaked softly, and a rush of cool air escaped from below. Darkness waited beneath. He pulled a small flashlight from his jacket and switched it on, illuminating a narrow ladder descending into shadow. After you, Meredith asked lightly. He shook his head. I go first. Nolan climbed down carefully, boots finding metal rungs he hadn't touched in years. Dust coated everything, but the structure held firm. Meredith followed silently behind. He replaced the panel above them, sealing out most of the light. Only the beam from his flashlight cut through the darkness. The air smelled faintly of earth and metal. You remember the layout? She whispered. Mostly. They moved forward slowly through the narrow tunnel. Pipes ran along one wall, wires bundled overhead. Every sound felt amplified, their breathing, the scrape of boots against concrete. Above them, faint footsteps echoed. Voices, muffled but present. They froze. Nolan turned off the flashlight instantly. Darkness swallowed them. A heavy object shifted somewhere overhead, a metallic clang followed by low conversation. Meredith leaned closer. Garage. Nolan nodded silently. He waited until the noise faded, then switched the light back on, angling it low to avoid casting shadows upward. The tunnel narrowed as it approached the garage foundation. Nolan's heart pounded steadily, not from fear, but from anticipation sharpened by training. They reached a section where the concrete above looked newer than the surrounding structure. He stopped. That wasn't here before, he murmured. A faint mechanical hum vibrated through the ground, steady, industrial. Meredith crouched beside him, pressing her palm lightly against the wall. Machinery, she whispered. Nolan searched along the edge of the tunnel until he found a maintenance hatch, small, square, almost hidden beneath accumulated dust. He hesitated only a moment before carefully loosening it. Light spilled through the opening, bright white. He lowered himself slowly, eyes adjusting. What he saw made his breath catch. Tables lined the space above, stainless steel surfaces covered with equipment. Containers labeled with chemical warnings. Tubing connected to sealed tanks. Workers in protective gear moved carefully between stations. Machines hummed steadily, processing something in controlled batches. Rows of packaged materials stacked against the wall. Meredith leaned beside him, her eyes widening. Jesus, she whispered. Nolan felt a cold clarity settle over him. This wasn't speculation anymore. This wasn't just suspicious activity. Hidden beneath his old garage, beneath the house he once called home, a fully operational lab produced synthetic opioids. Chapter 6, The Truth Revealed. Nolan didn't move for several seconds. The light from the hidden lab below the garage illuminated half his face, leaving the other half in shadow. Machines hummed steadily, an artificial heartbeat beneath the house that once held birthday parties, quiet mornings, and laughter that felt honest. Now it hid something else entirely. Meredith leaned closer beside him, her voice barely a breath. We need documentation. Nolan nodded slowly, forcing himself into motion. He pulled his phone from his pocket, switching it to silent recording mode. The lens angled downward through the narrow maintenance opening. Rows of stainless steel tables reflected harsh white light. Clear tubing ran between glass vessels filled with pale liquid. Digital monitors displayed temperature readings, chemical formulas, time processes. Workers in protective masks moved efficiently, no wasted motion. This wasn't amateur work. It was organized, practiced, professional. Nolan's jaw tightened. One worker adjusted a valve, while another sealed small packages inside airtight containers. Labels printed automatically from a nearby machine, sliding on as stacks with mechanical precision. Meredith lifted her own phone, capturing wide shots and zoom details. "Look at the scale," she murmured. Nolan followed her gaze. Crates lined the far wall, marked with coded symbols and shipping numbers. A whiteboard stood near a workstation filled with columns of dates, quantities, and destination initials. "Distribution planning. Get that," Nolan whispered. She nodded, zooming in carefully. Above them, faint footsteps crossed the garage floor. Nolan froze instinctively, holding his breath. Voices followed. Two men entered the lab area, their conversation drifting clearly through the opening. "Shipment tomorrow night," one said. "Reed wants double output this week," the other replied. Nolan's eyes sharpened at the name. Meredith glanced at him briefly, confirming they both heard it. "Quality control flag batch 4," the first man continued. "Said potency was higher than planned." "That's not our problem," the second said. Reed said, "Push it through." Nolan felt something cold twist inside his chest. Higher potency. Push it through. The implication settled heavily. People weren't just buying this. People were dying from it. Meredith captured the audio silently, angling her phone closer to the opening. "DA pressure increasing," one worker added quietly. "He wants everything moving faster before anyone starts asking questions." "Then we move faster," the other replied. The conversation faded as they walked deeper into the lab. Nolan lowered the phone slowly, his hand steady but his thoughts shifting rapidly. This was no longer just about betrayal. No longer about Laurel or Reed taking his company, his house, his marriage. This was about lives. He remembered the medical reports Meredith showed him earlier: overdose spikes, new compounds, unexplained deaths. Faces he'd never see, families he'd never meet, but whose pain now felt connected to this room beneath his feet. He swallowed hard. "They know," Meredith whispered quietly. "They know exactly what they're doing." Nolan nodded once. Anger flickered through him, sharp and immediate, but training held it in check. Acting on emotion now would destroy any chance of stopping this properly. He forced himself to keep observing. Another man entered the room, older, sharply dressed, even in protective gear. He moved with authority, checking equipment, pointing at charts. The workers straightened slightly around him. "Is that?" Meredith began. Nolan shook his head slightly. "Not Reed, but close to him. A lieutenant." "Production schedule updated," the man announced. "Reed wants increased output before the end of the quarter. No delays." There was again Reed's name. Leadership confirmed. Meredith zoomed in on the man's face, then on the production board behind him. "We have enough," she whispered. "Not yet," Nolan said quietly. "Keep recording." He scanned for additional details: shipping labels, chemical containers, anything tying the operation directly to Reed's network. A clipboard rested near the edge of one table. Nolan adjusted the angle of his phone, capturing a list of codes alongside supplier names. His supplier names. Companies he had once trusted. Companies tied to his old import license. "They're using your infrastructure," Meredith murmured. "I know." He felt the weight of that realization settle deeply, anger mixed with guilt. Reed had twisted something Nolan built into something destructive. A worker removed a protective mask briefly, wiping sweat from his face. "You hear about the last batch?" he said quietly to another. "The one that sent people to the hospital?" "Not hospital," the first man corrected grimly. "Morgue." Nolan's breath stopped. Meredith lowered her eyes briefly, absorbing the words. There was no ambiguity anymore. No room for doubt. This lab wasn't just illegal. It was lethal. Nolan closed his eyes for a moment, steadying himself. He had faced combat zones, impossible choices, moments where life and death balanced on seconds. But this felt different, quieter, colder. Systematic harm disguised as business. He opened his eyes again, focus returning sharper than before. "We've seen enough," Meredith whispered. Nolan nodded slowly. He replaced the maintenance hatch carefully, sealing the opening and plunging them back into darkness. For a moment, they remained still, listening to the hum above. His heartbeat slowed gradually. "What now?" Meredith asked softly. Nolan didn't answer immediately. His first instinct screamed for action, to storm upstairs, confront Reed, drag him out by the collar, and end this tonight. But that would destroy the larger case. They needed more than anger. They needed strategy. "We don't rush," he said finally. Meredith studied his face, recognizing the shift. "This isn't about revenge anymore," he continued quietly. "People are dying because of this." She nodded. "We dismantle it properly," he said. "Every piece, every connection." They began moving back through the tunnel slowly, careful not to make noise. Behind them, the hidden lab continued its work, unaware that its secrets had just been exposed. Nolan's mind raced ahead, planning, calculating, mapping possibilities. Reed had built something dangerous, and Nolan had decided how it would end. Chapter 7, Phase 1. Strategic Revenge. The world above the hidden lab continued, as if nothing had changed. Music drifted through the house again, low and controlled, while guests returned to their conversations and wine refills. Nolan stepped back inside through the rear entrance, adjusting his expression carefully until it reflected nothing but mild interest. Inside, Reed laughed loudly at something a man in a gray suit had said. The sound grated against Nolan now, false confidence layered overwrought. Meredith entered a few minutes later through the front door like any other late arrival. Laurel greeted her warmly, introducing her as Tyler's music teacher, and most guests barely gave her a second glance. Exactly as planned, Nolan caught Meredith's eye briefly across the room. No words were needed. The shift between them was subtle but unmistakable. They were no longer observing. They were moving. Phase 1 had begun. Nolan approached the bar, where two men stood, discussing investments. One of them, Harrison, he recognized from old business dealings. Harrison had always been cautious, risk-averse, a man who valued reputation above profit. "Perfect. Harrison," Nolan said, offering a polite nod. Harrison blinked in surprise. "Nolan? I didn't realize you'd be here." "Neither did I," Nolan replied dryly. They shared a brief laugh, tension easing slightly. "How's business?" Harrison asked. "Different," Nolan said. "I stepped away from some partnerships recently." Harrison nodded knowingly, glancing toward Reed. "Yes, I heard. Complicated situation." Nolan leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice just enough to create intimacy. "Be careful with Reed," he said quietly. Harrison frowned. "What do you mean?" Nolan hesitated deliberately, as if unsure whether to continue. "I shouldn't say too much," he said. "Just make sure you know exactly what you're investing in." Harrison's smile faded. "Is there something I should know?" Nolan gave a small shrug. "Probably nothing. Just old instincts." He left before the man could press further, planting the seed without revealing details. Across the room, Meredith spoke with Laurel's sister, Dana, near the staircase. Dana laughed easily, unaware of the storm forming beneath the surface. Nolan moved closer casually, joining their conversation. "Tyler's doing very well with piano," Meredith was saying. "He has strong focus." "That's Nolan," Dana said teasingly. "Always serious." Nolan smiled faintly. "Only when necessary." Dana leaned closer conspiratorially. "You picked a strange night to visit. Reed's been on edge all week." "Oh," Nolan asked casually. "Business stress," she said. "Laurel won't admit it, but something's going on." Meredith and Nolan exchanged a brief glance. "Families notice things others miss," Meredith said gently. Dana nodded. "Laurel barely sleeps lately." Nolan filed that away. Pressure point. A few minutes later, he excused himself and stepped toward another group near the fireplace, two investors discussing logistics contracts. Nolan listened quietly before interjecting with a neutral question about shipping delays. The conversation shifted naturally. "Supply chains have been unpredictable lately," Nolan said, "especially with chemical imports." One of the men stiffened slightly. "Depends on who you're working with," he replied cautiously. Nolan nodded. "True. Some operations are riskier than they appear." Again, He left before revealing anything concrete, allowing their imaginations to fill the gaps. By the time dinner resumed, subtle changes rippled through the room. Conversations lowered in volume. Guests glanced toward Reed more often, curiosity mixing with uncertainty. Reed noticed. Nolan saw it immediately. The way Reed's eyes narrowed slightly, tracking interactions, measuring shifts in energy. Laurel approached Nolan near the window. "What are you doing?" she asked quietly, voice tight. "Standing," he said lightly. "Don't play games with me." Nolan met her gaze calmly. "You invited me." Her jaw tightened. "You're talking to people. That's what guests do." She hesitated, searching his face for something she couldn't quite find. "Reed doesn't like surprises," she said finally. "That sounds like a Reed problem." Laurel looked away first, anxiety flickering through her composure. Across the room, Meredith handed her phone discreetly to Dana. "Just look at this," Meredith said quietly. Dana's expression shifted from curiosity to confusion. "What is this?" "Something you should ask Laurel about," Meredith replied gently. The screen displayed only fragments, vague financial irregularities, enough to spark concern, but not enough to expose the entire operation. Dana's eyes darkened slightly. Another crack. Reed crossed the room toward Nolan, drink in hand, smile fixed but eyes sharp. "You're popular tonight," Reed said. "People remember me," Nolan replied. "They remember what happened too," Reed said quietly. Nolan shrugged. "History has layers." Reed leaned closer. "If you're here to cause trouble, I'm here because you invited me," Nolan interrupted calmly. Reed studied him for a long moment. Suspicion crept into his expression. "You've always been good at playing the long game," Reed said. Nolan smiled faintly. "And you've always underestimated patience." Reed laughed softly, but the sound lacked warmth. As he walked away, Nolan felt the tension in the room rising, subtle but undeniable. Guests whispered more quietly. A few checked their phones more frequently. One investor slipped outside to take a call, his expression troubled. Meredith joined Nolan near the window. "You're destabilizing him," she murmured. "Not yet," Nolan said quietly. "Just loosening the foundation." "Dana will confront Laurel," Meredith said. "Good," Nolan replied. Pressure from inside, the family forces mistakes. Reed stood near the bar again, scanning the room with increasing unease. Social cracks had begun to spread through his empire, and he could feel it. The tension thickened as Reed's gaze returned repeatedly to Nolan, suspicion sharpening with every passing minute. Chapter 8. Pressure Builds. The shift began quietly. Nolan noticed it first in the way phones started appearing in people's hands more frequently. Conversations paused mid-sentence as guests glanced down at screens, brows furrowing. The carefully curated atmosphere of Reed's dinner party, polished, controlled, confident, began to fracture around the edges. Music still played. Glasses still clinked. But tension had seeped into the air like smoke. Nolan leaned casually against the kitchen counter, watching the room with calm detachment. Tyler sat nearby, quietly scrolling through something on a tablet Meredith had handed him earlier, a subtle way to keep him occupied and out of overheard conversations. Meredith moved fluidly through the guests, her presence almost invisible. She paused near a man Nolan recognized from earlier, the gray-suited investor, and exchanged a few quiet words. The man's expression shifted from polite interest to guarded concern. Phase 2 was unfolding exactly as planned. Nolan's phone vibrated softly in his pocket. He checked it discreetly. DEA inquiry initiated. Anonymous data request filed. Timeline accelerated. Meredith. He slid the phone away, pulse steady. Outside pressure had begun. Across the room, Reed laughed loudly again, but the sound felt forced now, a performance rather than genuine amusement. His eyes moved constantly, scanning faces, sensing change even if he couldn't yet identify the source. A woman near the dining table gasped softly. "Oh my God," she whispered. Several guests turned toward her. "What is it?" someone asked. She hesitated, clearly unsure whether to speak. "It's probably nothing," she said quickly, but her voice trembled. "Just news." Nolan watched carefully. What news? Another guest pressed. She glanced toward Reed, lowering her voice instinctively. Something about lawsuits, she murmured. Families filing against distributors connected to overdose cases. The room quieted slightly. Reed's head turned sharply. Nolan remained still, letting the moment unfold naturally. Probably unrelated, Reed said smoothly, stepping closer. Media exaggerates everything these days. The woman nodded, though uncertainty lingered in her eyes. Nolan noticed Harrison, the cautious investor, pull out his phone immediately, scrolling through headlines. Seeds planted earlier had begun to grow. Meredith appeared beside Nolan moments later. First wave confirmed, she murmured softly. How fast? He asked. Faster than expected, she replied. One of my contacts pushed the initial reports through priority channels. Nolan nodded slightly. Pressure from multiple directions, legal, financial, investigative. Reed's empire wouldn't collapse instantly, but cracks would widen. A loud voice rose from near the staircase. Dana. Laurel, can we talk? She asked, her tone unusually serious. Laurel looked startled, but nodded quickly. They stepped into the hallway, partially out of sight. Nolan watched closely. Minutes later, Laurel returned alone. Her composure had slipped. She moved directly toward him. We need to talk, she said quietly. Nolan nodded and followed her into the small sitting room near the front of the house. The door closed behind them, muffling the noise of the party. Laurel turned toward him, eyes searching his face. What are you doing? She asked. I'm attending dinner, he replied evenly. Don't, she said sharply. Don't give me that. Silence stretched between them. Her hands trembled slightly as she crossed her arms. People are acting strange, she continued. Dana is asking questions. Investors are whispering. And you show up out of nowhere after months of silence. Nolan said nothing. Her voice softened, shifting from accusation to something closer to desperation. You know something, she said quietly. He met her gaze calmly. Do I? Laurel stepped closer. Nolan, please, she said. If you're planning something, I need to know. The vulnerability in her voice felt real, but didn't erase what he had seen beneath the garage. What's going on with Reed? Nolan asked instead. Her eyes flickered. Business, she said quickly. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting, she replied, though her voice lacked conviction. Nolan studied her carefully. Laurel looked tired, dark circles beneath her eyes, tension etched into every movement. You're scared, he said quietly. She laughed weakly. Of you, of something, he corrected. Her silence confirmed it. You need to leave this, he said gently. Her head snapped up. Leave what? Whatever Reed is involved in. Her expression hardened instantly. You don't know what you're talking about. Nolan held her gaze. She looked away first. Outside, raised voices filtered faintly through the door. Someone arguing quietly near the dining room. The ticking clock had begun. Laurel's voice dropped to a whisper. Did you come here to destroy us? No, Nolan said honestly. I came here to understand. And now, she asked. He hesitated. Now I'm deciding what to do with what I understand. Her breath caught. Fear flashed openly across her face. You always did this, she said bitterly. Act like you're 10 steps ahead. Sometimes being ahead is the only way to survive. She shook her head slowly, eyes shining. I don't recognize you anymore. Nolan felt a quiet ache at that, but he didn't let it show. You stopped recognizing me a long time ago, he said gently. A knock interrupted them. Everything okay? Reed's voice called from outside the door. Laurel froze. Nolan watched her carefully. Yes, she replied quickly. We're coming. Reed didn't leave immediately. His shadow lingered beneath the door. Nolan felt the tension sharpen further, suspicion rising, pressure closing in from all sides. Laurel turned back toward him, eyes pleading. If you know something, please don't destroy everything, she whispered. Nolan didn't answer, because everything was already beginning to fall apart. They stepped back into the party together. The atmosphere had changed completely. Guests spoke in hushed tones. Two people stood near the front door, as if considering leaving. Harrison avoided Reed's gaze entirely. Another man paced slowly near the window, phone pressed tightly to his ear. Meredith caught Nolan's eye from across the room and gave a subtle nod. Investigators had begun asking questions. The pressure was building, and the dinner party, once a carefully staged display of success, had become a ticking clock counting down toward confrontation. Chapter 9. The Final Confrontation. The house felt different now. Every sound, the faint hum of the cooling system, the distant clink of leftover dishes being cleared, even the soft shuffle of Tyler's feet upstairs, carried weight. Nolan stood near the garage hallway, eyes fixed on the polished floor reflecting the harsh lights overhead. Reed had agreed to meet him here, alone. Nolan had insisted. Moments later, Reed appeared at the end of the hallway, his tailored suit disheveled just enough to suggest restless pacing. The confident swagger Nolan remembered had vanished, replaced by a taut stiffness, the kind of nervous energy that preceded mistakes. "Nolan," Reed said, voice low, almost a growl. "I should have known you'd find out. You underestimated me." Nolan replied evenly, stepping forward. "And you overestimated loyalty." Reed laughed, but lacked humor. It was sharp, jagged, the laughter of a man losing control. "They're all against me," Reed said, gesturing vaguely toward the house. "Investors, suppliers, even family." His eyes flicked toward the upstairs, where Tyler's faint shadow moved across the landing. "And you think you can stop me?" "I'm not thinking," Nolan said calmly. "I'm acting." Reed's gaze hardened. "You don't know what this cost me." "People died," Nolan said quietly, letting the words hang in the air. "Not just money." The mention of casualties silenced him. Reed's hands twitched, betraying his inner turmoil. "Wasn't supposed to," he stammered. "You built it knowing the risks," Nolan interrupted, "and you chose to ignore them." Reed's eyes darted around, searching for exits. "I can fix this. I can make it right." "We can." "Stop lying to yourself," Nolan said. "It's over." Reed's hand slipped into his jacket. Nolan froze instinctively, eyes narrowing. "Reed," Nolan warned, but it was too late. A metallic click echoed sharply, the unmistakable sound of a gun being chambered. Reed stepped back, raising the weapon with trembling hands. "Don't," Nolan said, his voice low and measured. "I won't go down without this," Reed spat. "You don't get to take everything." The seconds stretched. Each heartbeat drummed loud enough that Nolan could hear it in his chest. Reed's finger hovered on the trigger, shaking. Then, a flash from outside, headlights, rapid movement. The garage doors shivered slightly as voices barked orders. "FBI, stay where you are." Reed's head snapped toward the noise, panic overtaking bravado. "They're here?" "How?" "Meredith," Nolan said quietly. "You underestimated her too." Reed's hands wavered, and he spun toward the side exit. Nolan stepped forward, hand raised. "Don't move." Reed's voice rose, desperate. "I'll get away. You don't control this." Nolan advanced cautiously. "You're cornered. This ends now." From above, footsteps pounded down the stairs. Tyler's shadow appeared briefly, watching from safe distance. Nolan kept his focus on Reed, silently calculating each move. The man darted toward the exit, gun raised, heart pounding visibly. Nolan matched his pace, voice calm but authoritative. "Reed, stop." Reed spun, aimless, shooting into the empty space as if trying to blast through fate itself. A window shattered somewhere in the dining room. A crash echoed from the living room, the first true sign of chaos. Outside, black SUVs screeched to a halt. Agents in tactical gear moved with military precision, blocking all exits. Reed's movements became frantic, erratic, desperation driving him faster than skill. "Freeze!" A voice boomed from the driveway. "Federal agents. Guns down now." Reed's gaze darted through the garage windows, realizing his escape routes were gone. His gun wavered. Sweat streaked down his temple. Nolan stepped closer, hand near the sidearm at his hip, not to shoot, but to be ready. "You can't win," Nolan said firmly. "It's over." Reed's breathing grew erratic. He spun, swinging the gun toward Nolan with a wild motion. Nolan sidestepped, grabbing Reed's arm and twisting it just enough to force the weapon away. A muffled shout followed, then another, as agents poured through the doors and windows. Reed struggled violently, but it was futile. Multiple agents descended on him, disarming him and cuffing his wrists. He flailed, kicking at the polished floor, eyes wild with fear and disbelief. "You don't understand," Reed shouted, voice cracking. "You can't stop this." "You already did," Nolan replied quietly. Laurel appeared suddenly near the garage entrance, her face pale and anxious. One of the agents guided her gently, hands firm but not rough. "Ma'am, you're in protective custody," the agent said. Laurel's eyes flicked toward Nolan, a mixture of fear, guilt, and relief crossing her features. She didn't resist, but her hands shook as they guided her away. Tyler appeared at the top of the stairs, eyes wide. Nolan called softly, "Stay there, Tyler. Watch safely." The garage erupted into controlled chaos. Agents secured the perimeter, shouting orders, directing personnel to key points. Cameras capture the scene. Reed's empire, the one built on deception, secrecy, and blood, crumbled within minutes. Reed was hauled toward a waiting SUV, shouting unintelligible threats over his shoulder. Agents guided Laurel into another vehicle. Nolan stood in the garage, hands relaxed now, though his mind raced with the aftermath, the implications, and the relief that it was finally over. Meredith appeared quietly beside him, scanning the scene. "You did it," she said softly. Nolan didn't respond immediately, eyes following Reed's SUV disappearing down the driveway. The adrenaline still coursed through his veins. "It's done," she said again. "Yeah," Nolan finally said, voice calm but heavy. "It's over." Above, the house remained eerily quiet. The once lively rooms now felt hollow, emptied of the people and energy that had masked the danger beneath. Nolan walked slowly toward the living room, passing shards of glass from the broken window. He noticed overturned chairs, abandoned plates, and the faint smell of burned nerves, a trace of chaos left behind. For the first time since he arrived, he allowed himself to breathe fully. The empire Reed had built, secret shipments, hidden labs, and lethal schemes, had collapsed in front of him. And for the first time in months, Nolan felt the weight begin to lift. The confrontation had been dangerous, close to deadly, but precise. No one else had been hurt. The law had arrived just in time, controlled and exact. He turned toward Meredith, nodding once. "We'll clean up the rest," he said quietly. She smiled faintly, approvingly. Step by step, above them, Tyler watched silently from the stairs, a mixture of awe and relief in his eyes. Nolan moved toward him, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. The threat that had loomed over their lives, Reed's secret empire and its consequences, had ended tonight. The chaos subsided. The agents continued their work outside, and the first steps toward justice were being taken. For Nolan, the moment was bittersweet. The fight was over, but the consequences would echo. He finally allowed himself a small, steadying exhale, eyes scanning the garage one last time. The empire was gone, the danger neutralized, and he had been the one to make it fall. Chapter 10, Reclaiming the Future. The house smelled of fresh paint and sawdust. The garage doors gleamed under new sunlight, polished wood and metal replacing the dark, foreboding space that had once hidden destruction beneath its floor. Nolan ran a hand along the newly installed countertop, feeling the smoothness beneath his fingertips. Each surface, each corner, spoke of careful rebuilding, not just of the house, but of everything it had once represented. Tyler sat on the edge of the porch, legs swinging, a small grin on his face as he watched the workers finish the final touches. "It's nice," he said quietly. "Feels normal." "Normal is good," Nolan replied, crouching to be at eye level. "It means we can actually enjoy it." Tyler looked thoughtful for a moment, then nodded. "I like it better than before. No scary people, no weird trucks, nothing hiding in the walls." Nolan smiled, ruffling his son's hair. "Nothing like that now. Just us. And a clean slate." Inside the house, the phone rang. Nolan glanced at it, a call from the attorney handling the Reed case. He answered quickly. "Yes." Nolan said. "Mr. Nolan, good news," the attorney's voice said. "Reed's arraignment went as expected. He's facing multiple federal charges, conspiracy, trafficking, endangering public health. His cooperation with the authorities is non-existent, and the prosecutors are confident of a long sentence. Nolan allowed himself a short, private exhale. Thank you. That's justice. You earned it, the attorney replied. And thanks to your evidence and Meredith contacts, the case is airtight. He hung up, letting the weight of the words settle. Justice had been served, but more importantly, the threat had been neutralized. He walked toward the rebuilt garage, sunlight spilling in through the large windows. Meredith appeared at the doorway, carrying a small box of tools she had used to help with minor installations. She smiled as she set it down on the counter. Looks like the final coat of paint is holding, she said. Nolan glanced at her, letting a rare smile touch his lips. Couldn't have done it without you. She shrugged lightly, as if to downplay her role. You didn't exactly make it easy, keeping me on my toes all the time. You think I wanted to make it easy? Nolan asked, a playful edge in his tone. Meredith laughed softly. The sound was lighter than anything he had heard in the past months, carrying relief, triumph, and the promise of something more. Seriously, she said, this place, it's different now. Feels like it's ours again. Nolan nodded. Yeah, we rebuilt more than walls here. We rebuilt trust, stability. Laurel's situation had been addressed quietly, but thoroughly. She had cooperated with the authorities, providing full access to evidence, and in return, her sentence was mitigated. She would face consequences, yes, but her help ensured that the network Reed had built could be dismantled completely. Nolan didn't feel victory over her, only relief that the chaos she had been part of could finally be contained. The final pieces of the legal puzzle were falling into place. Financial institutions had begun closing accounts tied to Reed, medical authorities had secured records for further investigation, and local communities affected by the drug operations were finally able to seek restitution. The shadow over Nolan's past had lifted incrementally, replaced by a tangible sense of resolution. Tyler's voice brought him back to the present. Dad, can we finally start the music room? Nolan grinned. Absolutely. Piano first. Tyler nodded enthusiastically, running toward the previously cleared corner where the upright piano now sat, polished and inviting. Nolan followed, watching his son lift the heavy lid, press the keys, and let the sound fill the room. Each note was a victory, small but meaningful. Meredith moved beside Nolan, her eyes softening as she watched Tyler play. You've done a lot here, she said. Not just the house. Nolan glanced at her. Yeah, but we didn't do it alone. Their hands brushed briefly as they stood together, a subtle acknowledgement of the trust and partnership that had developed over months of danger, planning, and shared purpose. It wasn't rushed, not a sudden romance, but a careful, deliberate connection that grew naturally, the kind built on respect, reliance, and shared triumph. Outside, the sun climbed higher. Workers finished setting up the final exterior details, a fresh coat of paint on the trim, new landscaping along the walkways, and a sturdy new gate replacing the one Reed had exploited for deliveries. Nolan took a slow breath, feeling the crisp air fill his lungs. This house, once a symbol of loss and betrayal, now stood as a testament to reclamation and resilience. He glanced back inside at Tyler, who had moved on from the piano to a stack of music sheets, humming a melody. Nolan's heart swelled with a quiet pride. The boy had endured months of uncertainty, of fear, and now he could enjoy the space safely. Meredith nudged him gently. Time to take a step back, she said. Let them enjoy it too. Nolan nodded. He stepped into the hallway, letting the sunlight warm his face, and allowed himself to survey the space fully. The living room where laughter could return, the kitchen that now felt open and safe, the garage that had been transformed from a chamber of secrets into a symbol of renewal. He thought of the months of planning, the risks, the sleepless nights. Each decision, each careful move had led to this moment. Reed was imprisoned. Laurel's cooperation had prevented further harm. And now, this home, their home again, reflected not the pain of the past, but the potential of the future. Tyler's voice called from the piano room again. Dad, listen to this part. Nolan smiled, walking toward the sound. Meredith following quietly behind. They paused at the doorway, watching Tyler experiment with chords and melody. You know, Nolan said softly to Meredith, we've got a long road ahead. But for the first time, I actually see it clearly. Meredith nodded. And we'll walk it together, she said. Nolan allowed himself a small, steady laugh. Yeah, slowly, carefully. Tyler looked up and grinned, his eyes bright with innocence and hope. It's perfect, he said simply. Nolan crouched to hug him, feeling the solid weight of reassurance and protection. It is, he agreed. It's perfect. Outside, the rebuilt garage gleamed in the sunlight, the driveway clear and open. The neighborhood hummed with life, oblivious to the chaos that had once lurked behind these walls. Nolan stepped back onto the porch for a moment, letting the warmth soak through him. The past had been reclaimed, the present secured, and the future, finally, was theirs to shape. Together, Nolan, Tyler, and Meredith stood at the threshold of their home. For the first time in years, they weren't running from shadows. They weren't reacting to danger. They were standing firm, safe, stronger, and ready to move forward. The house, once a stage for betrayal, had become a sanctuary of hope. And Nolan knew, as he watched his son and Meredith, that this time, the story they were building would be theirs entirely, free from deceit, free from fear, and full of promise. The sunlight glinted off the garage doors one last time, a symbol not just of what had been lost, but of everything they had reclaimed and would continue to rebuild. And for Nolan, that was enough.